everyone, it's Lisa from My Dreaming Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. Now today I'm doing a soap with pumpkins all over it. Now I know it probably seems a little bit early, it's not getting to that autumn time yet, but I wanted to make a pumpkin mould to make it available in the shop so that soap makers can use it in their autumn soaps. So therefore I had to get a bit ahead of the game and actually make it before anyone else needs it. So I've been busily handcrafting individual tiny pumpkins to use as embeds and making a nice silicone mould of them. And what I'm going to do is just use them in this video to make a nice pumpkin topped soap. So at the moment I'm just mixing up some tiny weeny amounts of soap to fill my pumpkin mould up. And first I'm just going to take a little pipette and use that green soap that I mixed up, which is made with Emerald Lagoon mica from Pure Rock Minerals. And I'm just dropping a very small amount into the stem of the pumpkin. Now I'm doing mine green because I want mine to look like the pumpkins are still in the field. You could potentially choose to do yours brown like a cut pumpkin, or just do the whole pumpkin orange, whatever floats your boat. Now this is a pretty easy mould to use. You just need to be careful that as you're filling these little pumpkins up, to do it quite carefully and run the soap down the side of the stems, because you don't want to trap any air in, because then you'll have holes and broken stems and all that sort of thing. And then once I'd finished filling with my green soap, I just went over with a little stick, basically mine's the end of a thermometer, and just wiggled in each of those stems just to check and really make sure that there were no little air bubbles trapped. And then when I'm going to fill in the body of the pumpkins, I want them to be various different shades. I don't want every pumpkin to look exactly the same colour. So I've got some Clementine Pop mica, and I'm just going to start off putting a tiny bit of that into some soap batter so I get a very pale orange colour. I am going to start the orange again using a pipette just to make sure I don't pour the soap in too quickly and disturb those stalks, because it's still very fluid. I haven't stopped and let this set up. Of course you could do that if you wanted to, but a little pipette just dropping in the first layer, and then after that you can then just pour in the top quite safely. And then I just carried on doing exactly the same, filling up the rest of the mould. I did some pumpkins with the rest of my Clementine Pop in to get a nice orange colour. And then for a few of the last ones, I just added a little bit of neon orange just to get some really bright pumpkins at the end. One of the reasons I added the neon is I didn't want neon pumpkins, but things like oranges and yellows can actually fade when they go through gel a little bit, so this was just a way to make sure I did have some pumpkins that were a good strong colour. I left these overnight to set up. Now I do always add sodium lactate at a rate of 1.32% of my oils. That's basically this very similar to 1 teaspoon per pound of oils, and that always helps with unmoulding things. So these are them the next day, and as you can see, all I'm doing here is I didn't worry too much about being super tidy with that pour, because it's very easy just to scrape off the excess whilst the pumpkins are still in the mould. Don't pop them out and then try and scrape each individual one. That'll take you forever. So just scrape them off before you pop the pumpkins out. And then as you can see, the pumpkins unmould really nice and easily by just pushing on the back of the mould, and out we pop our super cute little pumpkins. Now I don't actually want to make this an autumn or a Halloween themed soap because it's far too early. So I am going to extrude a few more bits and pieces. First of all, I'm just using this extruder disc with very small holes in, just to extrude some very thin pieces of soap dough. And this is going to represent, you know, you get some sort of like spiral sometimes in a pumpkin patch where the vines have sort of curled themselves around, almost like a spring. So that's what I'm going to do with these. Now, anytime you're trying to manipulate very thin bits of soap dough, it's always best to just do a little bit at a time. Don't extrude a whole bunch because it will dry out too quickly and it'll end up cracking. So all I've done here is I've got a thin metal pole. It's just the end of an old whisk, you know, one of those mini whisks that I had. And I have sprayed it with some rubbing alcohol so that my soap dough isn't going to stick to it. And then I'm just wrapping my little bits of soap dough around it to make some sort of spring shapes. And those will be my curly vines. Don't wrap the soap dough on here too ridiculously hard because firstly it may break and secondly you're going to have trouble getting it off. But certainly having it sprayed with some rubbing alcohol or even some distilled water would be great, and then you can just slide those little vine bits off nice and easily. And I just carried on and made a whole bunch of these, well, certainly enough to make sure I got one on the top of each bar of soap. I want the inside of my soap to look like all the ground below the pumpkin patch. So next I'm going to extrude some roots to go through the top layer of that soap. And just remember, if you're ever trying to extrude something fiddly like this, it's got some very small bits to it, make sure you extrude as straight as possible. So get that soap dough as straight as you can coming out of the extruder to start with. And then try and get it to extrude nice and straight. It doesn't matter if there's a little bend in it, but you don't want it all twisted, because anytime you then try and straighten it out again, you may potentially crack your soap dough. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and extrude and trim down the rest of these roots that I want for my soap. And next is some rabbits, because my soap plan is to have rabbit burrows underneath the ground below my pumpkin patch. So once again, nothing unusual here. I've just got my rabbit discs and I'm just going to extrude some little white rabbits to go in my soaps. Now this is the actual design that I've drawn up that I'm hoping to achieve in my soap. And I've had quite a few people recently ask me how I work out how much soap to use for each bit of my design. Now I have done some other videos where I've gone through that in really quite a bit of detail, so I'm going to link those in the description below, so if you haven't seen those you can go and watch them. I'm not going to go through it in detail in here because obviously you can just go and watch those other videos, and we don't have to go through all the maths calculations and that again on a video like this. I know some of you like the maths, but I also know some of you don't. Now I am going to make this soap in separate layers, and I want to make sure that the rabbit warrens are the same colour, even though I'm going to mix them up separately. So all I'm doing first of all is adding a tiny weeny bit of titanium dioxide to these oils that I need for these areas. This is literally 1 gram of titanium dioxide, so I just want a tiny bit. Now I'm doing this now because I'm going to make this soap in layers. I know it's a fairly straightforward design and you might think, why don't you mix the whole lot up and just pour it all in one go rather than mucking around with layers. The reason why is because of the fragrance oil that I'm using. It sets up really quick. I guess it would be one of those fragrance oils that you might deem as a badly behaved fragrance oil. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But what it does mean is I can't afford to mix it all up in one go, because when I get to my top layer, I need to put in those fiddly little roots of my pumpkins, and therefore I need to get soap in between all of those embeds, and I'm not going to be able to do that if my soap batter has set up really stiff, so I need to keep things fluid. The fragrance oil I'm using today is Palo Santo from Sensory Perfection in the UK. Now this is a fragrance oil that accelerates really quite quickly and also discolours to dark brown. But it does smell really gorgeous and it's perfect for this soap. So I've measured out the oil and the lye that I need for my first section, and that's going to be the bit in the bottom corner of the soap. And I'm just going to blend those together as normal and bring them to an emulsion. And whilst I'm doing this, I just want to talk a little bit about badly behaved fragrance oils. I really think that fragrance oils that often a lot of people deem are badly behaved really aren't. They're typically just a badly prepared soaper rather than a badly behaving fragrance oil. Because as far as I'm concerned, a fragrance oil should fragrance your soap. So to me, a fragrance oil that loses its scent through saponification is badly behaved. It's not doing its job. There are other things that are badly behaved. So for example, if your fragrance oil completely splits your soap out and therefore stops it turning into soap, that's badly behaved too. But something that accelerates, something that discolours, that's just the nature of the fragrance oil. And if you're prepared and if you've tested, then you shouldn't fall foul of those things. And in fact, fragrances that accelerate are fragrance oils that are very well behaved in a circumstance like this. So for example, if I tried to make this soap or any sort of layered soap with a decelerating fragrance oil, that would be a complete pain. And those fragrance oil that keep your batter fluid for ages, we all go, woohoo, it's great, it behaves really well. Well, only if you want it to stay fluid for ages. Okay? When we want something to set up, use an accelerating fragrance oil. And again, in this situation, I'm doing an under the ground type soap. So basically I want brown. So this is perfect. I can use my fragrance oil and not have to put any mica into my soap. Now, even though this fragrance oil does accelerate, I am going to blend it into my batter. Now, the reason I want to do this is because I'm going to be using my fragrance oil to colour my soap. So therefore I want to make sure that it's as dispersed as evenly as possible throughout the batter. Now quite often you will see people that are using a discolouring fragrance oil still add brown mica to it. And if you're worried about maybe getting some uneven discolouring, you could do that just to be nice and safe. But if you've given it a nice blend and made sure it's really evenly dispersed, then you shouldn't necessarily need to do that. But there's nothing wrong with a little bit of belts and braces and putting a bit of brown mica in if you wanted to. For my soap, I like the idea of playing with the fragrance oil and the discoloration to give me the design that I want. So let's just pour that soap batter into the mould, and as you can see at this point it is still fluid. It's not going to turn into soap on a stick or anything horrible, but it will set up really quickly. You'd never get to do some really lovely swirls or anything with this one. And this is perfect for my needs because pretty well as soon as this hits the soap mould and you stop stirring it around, it starts to set up. So therefore it's nice and easy for me to start to scrape it into the shapes that I want for the layers in my soap. And then onto my second layer. Now this is going to be the lighter area where those first two rabbits are sitting in. I'm going to make this go up to the bit, can you see where the tunnel goes, where that third rabbit is? And remember, I've made this from the oil that had that tiny weeny bit of titanium dioxide in. Now, the other thing I've done to make sure I get a good contrast in my colours is I've put more fragrance oil in the dark bits and less fragrance oil in the light bits. Now, often you hear about people leaving out fragrance oils and that sort of thing, and you may wonder whether it's okay to do that and whether it actually works. The case is, it depends. You know I'm going to tell you to test your fragrance oil. Of course I'm going to tell you. But one of the things to test it for is if you do have a discolouring fragrance oil, when you do your test, do a bit of your tester soap with the fragrance oil in and a bit of it with plain batter, and then you'll see if your fragrance oil migrates into the other bits of the batter. Because obviously if you leave fragrance oil out of something but it migrates anyway, then that's a waste of time. Some of them do, some of them don't. The other thing to consider is the safety element with your soap. Now, we all know that all fragrance oils have a safe usage rate, and you can find this by looking at the IFRA documentation that will come with any fragrance oil. And that will tell you the maximum safe usage for your fragrance oil that you shouldn't go over. So let's imagine that you put 5% fragrance oil in your soap. I'm using that figure because it's very common for the people that watch my videos. Here in the UK, we have to stick to 3%. But let's imagine you're allowed to use 5%, so you're popping that in. Now, if you're only going to put fragrance oil in half of your soap, can you see that some of your soap won't have any fragrance oil in, and some of it will have 10% fragrance oil? So what I would always do if that was me is I would check the IFRA document and see what the safe usage limit is. If the IFRA is above 10%, then that's fine, go for it. If you had, let's say, an IFRA and it said the safe usage was maybe 5 or 6%, I would perhaps consider whether that's a good thing to do. Now again, there's no written rules about whether you should do it or not. Two schools of thought, really. First of all, you're going to use your soap and mush it around in your hands and get it all wet, and essentially the fragrance bits and the non-fragrance bit will get used up and sort of even out that fragrance oil over the whole bar of soap. So overall, you could say it doesn't really matter because of the way that soap is used. I would just be a little bit careful if I was selling my soap like that, because I'd be a little bit concerned that you never really know what people do. You know, what if they chopped the bar in half or did something weird like that? So I would just be a little bit careful and just check and just make sure that I was making a conscious decision that I was happy with making when I'm thinking about mucking around in splitting out and putting fragrance oil in only part of my soap at a higher rate. Whilst I've been going along, I have made a little bit of green batter up. That's because I'm going to be doing some piping on the top, so I'm just going to leave this to set up whilst I do the rest of my soap. Now I'm just going to set the rest of the inside of the soap to some music rather than me keep talking on and on and on. So I've just got the rest of the inside, the extra bit of the rabbit rum, the top layer and the roots. So let's just get that poured.
Oh, here you are, face to face in this trashy bar. Another glass and I am going places. Makes me laugh about the irony of everything. I like the way you're thinking. I don't really care about the music on the dance floor. I don't really mind all the smoke is in the bathroom.
So there's the inside of our soap all done. So we now just got to finish on the top. So I'm just taking those pumpkins that I made earlier and just popping them onto the fairly set up but still wet soap batter. And then we'll just finish off with that green piping that we had setting up and a just standard leaf tip and just pipe on the rest of our soap. And if you remember, I made those little sort of spirally vine bits, so I'm going to drop those on now and again too. And then here's our soap the next day, so let's start to unmould it. And you can see already on the side the difference in colours we're going to have between that high and low fragrance oil sections in the soap. And as we get to the middle, we can see that our discoloration is nowhere near complete yet. Sometimes people get very confused about partial gel and discoloration. We can see this will be discoloration because we've got a straight rim mirroring the outside of the soap. That's where the air has got to so far. If you had partial gel, you would have a almost round circle in the centre. Okay, so these will go darker and hopefully not too dark. Looking at the outsides, I think we're going to be okay. So we should have that distinction between the areas of the soap. And here are some final pictures of the soap. These were taken 3 days after the soap was cut and it hasn't got any darker since that point. I like the colouring that it's gone because it's now really brought out the roots at the top of the soap that you couldn't really see previously. These soaps will be for sale in my shop as soon as my safety assessment comes through for them. If you'd like to be notified of when I put new soaps up for sale, then why not pop along to my website, link in the description below, and sign up for notifications. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like the soap. If you have, it'd be great if you left me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, then why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comment, then please leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!